We are streaming.
It says no channels and no host live.
Yeah, it's it might be the delay. It looks good from my end, and Twitch says it's, yeah, my Twitch page has it as well. So I'm gonna pause that because it's weird. Just gonna ping people on our Discord channel, and then I'll talk about what I'm doing. All right, so hi everybody, I'm Scott and I work on CircuitPython for Adafruit. If you don't know, CircuitPython is a open source implementation of Python for microcontrollers. Originally, the parent project is called MicroPython. We've forked it as a friendly fork and really focused on beginner usage, which is not something that MicroPython focuses on. So I go by Tan Newt online. You're on my Twitch stream that is Tan Newt as well. And welcome. Thanks. I'm just going to be working on CircuitPython for an hour or so. I've got a meeting at 3:30 my time, so I've got just over an hour and 15 minutes until I have to do that. And this was inspired by Dakota Redstone, who has been in our Adafruit, the CircuitPython weekly that we run every week. It's usually on Mondays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And that's where we all get together. We cover like hug reports and status updates, state of CircuitPython, and then any other in the weeds discussions. If you're interested in that, go to our Discord channel, adafru.it/Discord to join. You can chat with us there all week. And Dakota had this request of like, hey, I'd really like to see like what the process is for doing some pull request reviews, because it's a really good way for people to get started and into contributing for CircuitPython. So let me take a page out of Kattni's book and just talk a little bit about what a pull request is. And if you need a reference, there's a great Learn guide that Kattni actually wrote called Contribute to CircuitPython with Git and GitHub. And I'll just copy this and put this in the Twitch chat as well. So that's a great reference if text reference material works well for you. But the general idea is that you have the original project, which for us is CircuitPython, and you want to make a change, or it might be a CircuitPython driver. You have this core repository on GitHub, which is the repository that we make releases that go into the bundle and that people download and they actually use. And then what you can do is you can fork that. And that means that you can say, I want a kind of a copy of that repository, and I want to make additional changes to it. And then a pull request is a request to the original repository, like, hey, you should pull these changes back into that original repository because it improves things, ideally, or it fixes an issue. And so that's kind of what a pull request is. So once you make that request on GitHub, people will be notified, like the maintainers of that original repository will be notified, like say, hey, you've got a pull request. And then it needs to be reviewed or it should be reviewed before it's merged in. And a review's purpose is to make sure that the code and the implementation works as described. So actually making sure that like it does what it says it does. And then also there are some stylistic elements that can come into that as well, of like, you named all your variables ABC, like please rename them so that they describe what it is actually. So that's just an example. But yeah, so the goal is to be able to validate a certain level of quality of the code before it gets merged in. And what you'll also see is that a lot of our repositories use Travis, continuous integration, CI, which is a way of us automating some baseline checks on the code that gets pulled into our repository. So that's what continuous integration is all about, is just like automating some of those baseline checks you need to pull in a review. And yeah, so let's just start. So I've got this Learn guide. It covers all of these issues about like grab your fork, work on a branch, how do you actually make the changes, but we're not going to cover that today. I'm not going to actually make any changes. Instead, I'm going to do take a look at giving a review is what I would take a look at. Kattni has a great description of this. There's all these other aspects as well, and she covers them in this guide of like, not only do you need to say like, hey, could you improve these things, but you need to do it in a way that still that leaves that person feeling empowered still and not unwelcome and unappreciated. Like you want people to feel appreciated. Even, yeah, here so Travis, yeah, it's just Travis .ci.org. Travis.ci.org. And then what you'll see is that in our repository itself, there's a specific file that tells Travis what to do and what to run. But again, I don't want to get into those weeds. So yeah, so code reviewing is all about making sure that the quality lives up to a bar, like is there, and doing it in a way that the person who's done the work up front still feels empowered, and that their changes are going to be merged soon. So there's a great example of a code review here. So I won't go over this. I'm just going to be a little bit less formal about it. Okay, so I guess the first step, if you do want to contribute, actually is figuring out like, okay, I want to contribute. I want to do some code reviews. Where do I find things that need to be reviewed? There's a couple ways to do that. Because I'm a member of the Adafruit organization, I automatically get subscribed to all of our repositories, and I get notifications when new pull requests come in. So I get that in email, and I'm not going to show you my email because there's other stuff in there. But there's also this site that I just found from another Twitch streamer called Noopkat, Noopkat. They do regular streams Sunday mornings, and it's also just open source reviewing that they do. So I found this tool. It connects to GitHub directly with your account, and it slurps in all of the notifications that you've received. Now, I've got 51 unread notifications, and I actually cleared this out like Tuesday, like 2 days ago. So yeah, I'm subscribed to a lot. So if we need to, we can pull stuff from here, but you kind of have to be set up for this already. So instead, what I'm going to find is, this is my GitHub homepage. They're trying to do like a social network, like notification feed sort of thing. But I actually don't ever really use this. What I'm going to use instead is I'm going to click over to the Adafruit CircuitPython repo. And then I'm going to look in the Issues tab. Now, these issues here generally are going to be fixing things in C, because C is the underlying language that CircuitPython is written in. So it's probably not where you want to look if you're looking to do Python work. Yeah, totally. Great. Summersoft, thanks for joining in the Twitch chat. And if anybody does join the voice channel on Discord, you will be broadcast on the stream as well. So, and there is a delay, so be aware of that as well. But there's so most of these issues here on the CircuitPython repo are going to be lower level C stuff, which may or may not be what you want to do. If you want to do more driver stuff, you can look for some labels. So these things after the text title are called labels. And you can look for driver is one option. So you can just click the label and you'll get all of the issues that are labeled as driver. And so you can see either like specific driver chips that people want to help change or need help with. And then there's also this other one that is kind of overlapping here, the library one. So let's just take a look at that as well. And you can see it's pretty similar number of them. So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, like I have this new chip, I'd really like CircuitPython to support it, and there's no repository for that individually yet, we'll suggest people just file issues here. And then when a separate driver repository is created for that, we will close that issue here and then move over to that. So for all of the existing drivers that we've written already, they all have their own repositories and they all have their own issue lists. Luckily, we have this script called Adabot, which looks over all of those repositories and aggregates for us the issues that we need to do for different things. So that aggregation is a little hard to find. We do talk about it in the weekly meeting that happens on Mondays. Again, plug that if you're just joining us. We have a CircuitPython weekly Monday morning Pacific time, so 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And then we cover a lot of this there as well. So Kattni keeps this CircuitPython libraries issue up to date every week with the latest both pull requests and issues. You can think of an issue as an earlier pull request, or where like an issue says like, here's this thing, it doesn't work, or here's this thing I'd like to add that we should add. But there's no actually like code written for that yet. It's just in the like ideation brainstorming phase of like, yeah, we should do this at some point. So because this is going to be a review stream, I'm actually going to ignore, I'll ignore the issues for now. But here you can see if I stop it so that it crystallizes if it's getting some artifacts. Here you can see a list of all of the different repository names. So a repository tends to be the organization at the start / the name of the actual repository. So here you can see that like this last one, for example, is Adafruit / Adafruit _ CircuitPython GPS. And the number 12 just tells you the number, the pull request number. And the numbers are also issue numbers. So if you're like, that's the first one I've seen, but it's still number 12, that's why. So let me just go over this. I haven't looked at these beforehand. If you missed it, Kattni did a stream earlier actually covering a specific pull request that she had found earlier and did a really nice job of doing a real review on that. So these are going to be more haphazard, more just like I'm looking at it for the first time. So let's take a look here. Let me just cover this. So here we have the title. It tells we're going to change latitude and longitude parsing to return degrees and minutes rather than decimal degrees. Here, this shows us that they want to merge their changes from Reporting's Junior master into Adafruit master, which is what we maintain. Other important things to note is that there it says, hey, this is this person's first time contributing. That's just a heads up for you to say like, hey, you probably haven't interacted with this person much, so be extra careful about what and how you say it to them. Because as we build up like rapport with the people that we work with, you're hopefully more forgiving for being a little bit more blunt. I also take that into account when I'm doing a review and asking or like the number of things that I'm asking about. Like if it's a new, yeah, Dakota says we're community as much as code. That is definitely true. And so when I see somebody new come in, I don't want to scare them off. And so I'll look it all over, and I might actually just pick like the 3 things that are the things that would bother me the most if we merged in. Because the other thing to realize that I also want to talk about is that nothing, like, even after something is merged, it can be changed, right? Like, it's not worth holding up a pull request forever most of the time, because afterwards you can always change it. You can always like, oh, I noticed that they're like indentations slightly different than what I'd like to do. Like, especially if they're a first time contributor, don't bother telling them that, right? Like, just merge it in and fix it. Like, you want them to be around and you want them to feel appreciated. So you have to think about like, what is it worth me doing? There's really good talks by Brett Cannon from the Python community about setting open source expectations, and he called it giving each other a favor for a little while, but didn't really like that. So the general idea is like, you know, everybody is a volunteer, or at least everybody is deciding to use their time to help you, or you're using your time to help someone else. So you just have to keep that in mind, right? Like, somebody took the work to create this pull request. So always keep that in mind. So this looks like I've actually looked at it already, and the way that I can tell that is that on the right hand side here, it says reviewers, and it says my name, and it has a red X, and that red X says like that I reviewed it and I requested some changes, and that was the last thing that we did on this. So let's just scroll down. I said, oh, I'd prefer a named tuple instead of a list. As it is now, it's hard to know what the 2 things are. And then I think Kattni, when she was going through this, said like, hey, by the way, like, we asked you to do something and we haven't heard from you. Like, we'll be leaving this PR open for 1 more week and then we'll just close it. I think that's not quite how I would, like, it's good to ping things and keep track of things, but I think the other thing that you can always do is you can always fix a pull request yourself and merge it in. Just because the original poster is not responsive doesn't mean you just close it. So if I just took a look at here, I can see that the list that they're talking about is all of these indices. And then there's indices here as well. Right, and that's because for math reasons, you have to keep 2 kind of parts to a particular latitude and longitude so that you have more precision. So one option I could do is I could actually go in and fix this and do it the way that I want. And then you should then, like, if you choose to take over a pull request, you should have somebody else look at it. Like, if I come back to this and I add the name tuple like I asked, I'll ask Kattni to review it, and then we'll get it merged in. And it's important to note that, like, that person who did the original request still should get credit, right? Like, they still fixed it. They just didn't quite fix it quite how you want. And so you should, like, even if you have to run and finish it, that's totally cool. But I don't think I'll do that here. Let's keep going. Let's take a look at some of these other ones. If you see any requests or you have anything, Summersoft or Dakota, let me know. Let's just take a look at the BME 680. That's true. Kattni points out that PRs can always be reopened as well. Very, very true. So, yes. So it's not a bad idea to just close it. Well, if you're just coming in and contributing, you won't be able to close things. You'll only be able to comment. But yeah, Kattni's totally right that if you do have rights and you think it should be closed, go ahead and close it. No big deal. If I think, oh, I'll just pick it up and fix it, I can always reopen it or clone it and create a new PR. So yeah, Kattni, you're totally right. Okay. So this is another, I looked at this one already before this stream, but let me just go over it again. So I'll just cover the parts of it again. So this is for the Adafruit CircuitPython BME 680, and it's to fix the compensation of pressure values. So if you're thinking about this and you're thinking about like, oh, what could I do to help with this review? Most of our stuff is CircuitPython libraries. And so the first question is, do I have the hardware? Or one question would be, do I have the hardware to actually be able to test it? Now, testing is super helpful because hardware is really, really hard to automate testing for, because you literally have different devices that need to be hooked up to other different devices. So when in doubt, if you're looking at a pull request, you have the code, or if you have the hardware that it's for, that's definitely something you could do. Even if other people tested it as well, like just you can download the file. So if I wanted to test this, most of our libraries are a single file that's just Adafruit BME 680. And to download it, you hit view the whole file, and that gets you the new version of the file. So this is the new version of the file for the pull request. And you can hit raw, and now you'll get just the file itself, and you right click save page as, and then you'll have this Adafruit BME 680.py file. You can copy that over to your CircuitPython device just like you would do any other driver, and test it that way. And then once you do that, if it works for you, just make a comment. Let me show you. If we go back, at the bottom here, you can just make a comment and say like, hey, I tested it and it worked as expected. 2 thumbs up, great. If it doesn't work, or you have some issues, just type them in there. Say like, hey, I tried to get this to work. This is what I did. And it didn't do what I expected, which was I expected it to do this, but it did this instead. That's always very helpful. And I should also say that approach of like, let me just test this on hardware is also really useful for validating issues. So before we get to this like fixed code phase, like if somebody files an issue and says like, hey, this isn't working like I expect, and you have that hardware, you can always just put it together and say like, yep, it doesn't work as it should either for me. That's always really useful, because when it comes to bug fixing, one of the really helpful things when fixing a bug is actually having what's called a repro, which is a instructions that reproduce the problem. So that when somebody who's more comfortable editing the code comes along, they can get straight to the problem and fix the problem and then get out of there. So yeah, let's just take a look at this. I think that this is really pending that manual testing that we like to do, and it's actually this review is assigned to Carter currently, who is paid by Adafruit to work on this stuff, which is great. But we do also all get a bunch of email, like my Octobox earlier. So the yellow dot here indicates that, hey, they've been asked to do the review, but they haven't done it yet. And then if you are the author of this pull request and it was given a reviewer but not responded to, and if I generally have a rule as like 24 hours during the work week, and then like weekends don't really count, but basically like if you've made a pull request and nobody's gotten back to you in a certain amount of time, please reach out on Discord or ping with a message mention. So to mention somebody both on Discord and GitHub, you do the @ and then their username. And that will like drop another email to them if they have it set up that way. And that'll make it easier to, perfect. And that'll make it easier to, or that'll make sure that they didn't miss it. And I'm laughing because in Discord, I got all excited earlier. Got hot. Now I'm getting cold again. Carter just said in Discord that the hardware's in the mail. So that's totally valid. And thank you, Carter, for all the work that you do. And that's totally fair. Like if Robert reached out to Carter and say like, hey, like I'm waiting on this review, Carter would just be like, sorry, the hardware's in the mail. I'll get to it when I receive it. Like that's totally legit. That just makes sure that like people know what's going on, which is good. So and then we can see here that it's just some math changes. So let me just cover the let me read first. Sorry, this is where all my like to my right is all my control stuff. Right, so Summersoft says, got distracted, so this may be a repeat, but if you review and do not have hardware to test, please mention that you didn't test it in your review. Correct. So in general, for device drivers, we do want at least one person to test. And if that's the author and nobody else is left to like do it, as Dakota is saying, duplication of effort, but really testing a second time. Like if nobody's around to test a second time and the person says they tested it, I'm okay merging it. But we also have a number of people that do have a lot of the hardware and can validate it. The other thing that I was going to cover is like, oh, well, I'm looking at this pull request and I don't have the hardware, or if you're like me and I'm pretty lazy when it comes to actually putting hardware together. So what am I looking for here? Now this changed. So the original view that you get dropped in is this conversation view. At the top here, there's commits, checks, and files changed. And then checks are actually also at the bottom here. I think this checks tab is empty. They're changing the way this works. The one that I pay attention to is the one at the bottom. So there's two things. There's this review requested, but our driver repositories don't actually require reviews as strictly as like the core CircuitPython one does. This would be red if we required it. But the other thing that we do require is that Travis passes. So let's actually take a look at this. I have a feeling it's a fake problem, but we'll take a look. I'm going too fast. I just wanted to see what the actual changes to the code were. The things that, like we talked about two repositories, right? Like there's the Adafruit repository and the Roberts repository for this case. And what Files Change tab does is it shows you the difference between the two in kind of one direction. Like what has Robert changed on top of Adafruit? And that's what's showing here. And it's just these two lines of code. Now it's definitely a math change. You can see that like this variable 1 went away and it was combined with the line above it. Which again is like, to make sure the logic is right, you really just want to do a manual test like Carter's going to do. And there's nothing stylistically that I would care about. Like looking at this alignment, maybe I would complain about that if it was like awkwardly shifted on the line. But this is such a small change that there's not too much besides like just validating it to look at. However, Travis did also fail. So for drivers, Travis is going to run what is called a Lint Check. And a Lint Check is kind of similar to what I was just talking about of like making sure things are shifted right and doing all that. So it will be kind of picky. And the goal is to have that pickiness automated. So one, it's consistent, and two, the human reviewers don't have to worry about it. They can just take a look and see what they think. They don't have to worry about the little details that computers are really good at. And those little details can really distract reviewers sometimes, which means that you end up not getting as high quality of a review, because you do want a review that is like, I don't think this math is right, versus you need to put another tab on this line. Like one of those is much more useful than the other. So, okay, so we're looking at this. The code looks okay. And Carter is going to manually test it when he gets to this. But Travis is failing. What's the deal? We want to make sure Travis passes, and that's something that Robert could take a look at. But it's also something that I know personally is very intimidating to people. Of like, it's red, and I understand that's bad, but I don't know what to do. So I think this is a good thing to cover. So first and foremost, it shows up. I'm on the pull request page. I'm on the conversation view, and I went down to the bottom. It's above where I can reply, and it says all checks have failed. I think sometimes it will be collapsed like this, and you'll have to hit show all checks. And then you can hit details. I think I've already hit it. Well, I guess I'll do it in this tab. Actually, no, I take that back. I want to leave the pull request open. So I'm going to middle click details, and it gives me a new tab. And I'll just close that. So, okay, now the question is like, okay, I see Travis failed. Why did Travis fail? So we can see that it's for pull request 14. And then what this is doing is it's literally running a Linux computer in the cloud, right? Like some data center somewhere is running this. And it's going through some instructions that we told it to do. And we can see what those instructions are here in the text output. So it starts by just like printing off some useful information, like what version of Python are we running, what version of pip, which is what's used to install stuff. We can see that it's going to install some prerequisites like Pylint. Pylint is what we use to do that nitpicky style stuff. And then it's running Pylint over Adafruit BME 680.py, which is exactly what like the file that had been changed. So Sedacious says that Pylint is a harsh mistress, which is true. That nitpickiness can be very frustrating at times. It has an interesting psychological event that Emily Dunham had talked about. She was really active in the community for Rust for a while, and talked about this idea of using bots as the, I don't want to say enemy because they are friends, like they make our code better, but they are it reframes the review process of like, here, let me help you get Pylint passing. Like I can help Robert get Pylint passing, and then it's kind of like it's more Robert and I versus Pylint than me versus Robert when it comes to reviews. And Pylint's not that bad, especially for this. So we can see here that it says, oh hey, like you have the wrong continued indentation. Summersoft says it can definitely get adversarial with Pylint. That's good. At least it's against a bot and not. So we'll come back to this. Just let me just cover the rest of it here first. And then the second thing that we're doing is we're doing build bundles, which is a script that we've written to take the individual pieces of a file or of a library and put them in a zip file that people can download and they can copy over to their drive. And that includes these kind of MPy files, which are like an intermediate, easier to load format. So it builds all of that. And that's what would be released if we were actually tagging it as release, but we won't cover that. So that's green. So this line here says, hey, build bundles exited with 0, which 0 in this world of Bash is everything's just fine. And it's 0 because everything non-zero can give you some clues about what the error is, but we don't have to worry about that. And then the last bit that happens here in our Travis check on our libraries, and this is, I should also say this is standardized. So these are kind of these are the checks that you'll find for all CircuitPython libraries that I was talking about earlier. Like the reviews the purpose of reviews is to give you a baseline of quality. And as we can see here, that baseline is Pylint should pass. So we've set up rules about indentation and naming and things that should pass. We've set up, we should make sure that we can actually zip everything up and build it the way that we would for release, which it actually does parse the Python. So if the Python itself is not syntactically correct, you may actually get an error there. And then lastly, this last bit is making sure that the documentation builds. So that the way that our CircuitPython libraries are documented is by, in the code itself, we put a little note that doesn't do anything code-wise, but says like, this function does this, or this attribute means that. And so because that's mixed into the code, that's not very human friendly. It's not like a web page you can go visit. So there's this tool called Sphynx, which is what we're running here, that will take in our Python code and produce something that's much easier to read. And it will check some things like in your comments, you can say like, refer to this other thing. And if that reference is wrong, it will say like, hey, your reference is wrong, and it will be read. But in this case, it exited with 0. Okay, so we were basically like 2 for 3, but Travis is a harsh mistress, as Sedacious says, and so we got to be 3 for 3, otherwise we won't merge the pull request. So let's go back to what I was about to do and go back to the Pylint output. So it says here, wrong continued indentation, add 1 space. So if we go back, and I had the pull request open, so let's just take a look at this again. So here's our main pull request page. We want to see what the code differences were, so we're going to hit files changed. And now we can see that like, okay, here's a continuation. I think this is what they're talking about. But let's take a look. So if we go back to Travis, it says add 1 space. It's like literally complaining about missing a space. Like, only computers can be this nitpicky. I mean, people can try, but they shouldn't be. And it says, this is the line that needs the extra space. So self.pressure calibration sub index 2 times 32, blah, 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 math. Like, I assume it's right. They tested it. I don't need to worry too much about the math. Let me find that line here, and we can see that that's the line where they deleted this var1. Now, I happen to know, over time, you build up a sense of how nitpicky computers are in general. And so what my guess is that if we look carefully here, these 3 opening parentheses are aligned. But they're telling us, like, Lint is saying like, hey, you actually want to line 1 more space, which would mean that this second line is aligned with the 3rd parentheses, not the 2nd. And that matters for, it's being that picky because it's trying to keep you indented more than your outer parentheses for what you're inside. So Dakota asks, is this an issue with parentheses not pairing up? And the answer is no. If you didn't have the parentheses matching up correctly, Python would complain because that would be a syntax error. But Pylint is adding an extra level of pickiness, saying like, all of the things, like if I did A plus B plus C, and I wanted to put A, B, and C on separate lines, it's saying that B in that case should be 1 character. It should align with A, and it should not align with the parentheses, if that makes sense. It's just an alignment thing. And it's being that, the reason that you usually want it to be that picky is that that alignment is telling you something about like, where is that thing within some parentheses. So if we go here and we start matching up parentheses, we can see that there's this group here. Right. Sedacia says, I think Pylint is complaining, basically saying that the way your parentheses are is harder to understand, or grok is the technical or the lingo. So what we can see here is that there's one full group of parentheses on this line, and then there's one closed. And that tells me, since I'm looking at the closed one, I would expect the item inside of that to be shifted to the right, because we're compared to the line below, because we're closing. And if we try to match it up, there's a bunch of nesting. So there's this inner nest and this inner nest. So I'm trying to figure out which top parentheses to align with. So there's this and this, and then that's all in here. And then there's one more, and this one more is the one we should align to. So it should be right there. So, I mean, if this actually happens to you, just add a space and be done with it. Like, Pylint and computers in general are really good at this sort of thing, so feel free to just take their word for it. And I'm actually going to play a trick. So I'm a maintainer of this repository. We have this group of people called CircuitPython librarians. And because I'm a maintainer, I actually get this little edit button. And actually, we have a number of maintainers actually watching this live, which is great. So this is a trick. When you create a pull request, GitHub now has the option of you can check a box and say, allow maintainers to edit this pull request or branch. And because I'm a maintainer and this person has given me that access, I can't actually change the file myself. Now, I don't always want to do this. But in this case, I think I do. So let me talk about that a little bit. If I edit this file, that change goes to their GitHub repository. But that GitHub repository is not actually the same as the version of the repository that is on their computer itself. And so if they make some changes on some additional changes on their own computer and try to rectify that with the changes that I may have made in their version of the GitHub repository, it can get confusing for Git. However, in this case where it's super minor, I'm adding a single space, and besides this, the code looks great. Like, Carter's going to test this in the mail, and then we're just like, Carter will merge it. Like, let's not worry about it. Like, we don't actually expect Robert, the original author, to have to do anything. So that means that we're not going to get into this, like, we both change the same thing. How do we end up with that? Yeah. Dakota and Summersoft says, yep, then you're in Git rebase land, and that's never fun. It's fun sometimes if you really understand Git, but most people don't. It's got a learning curve to it. So I'm actually just going to edit it. And then the reason I want to do this is also it gives, like, Travis takes some time to run. And so by doing it now, we can get ahead of the game. We can get Travis passing. And then when Carter verifies that it works, he has a really easy job of just hitting the merge button and we're off. So let's just find the line that was changed. It would be awfully nice if it was highlighted, but I think it's right here. That looks awfully familiar, and I'm just going to hit a space. And then I'm going to say added space for Pylint. Pylint. And then it gives me the option to commit directly to the master branch. And I can see it's a little confusing because there's two master branches involved. There's both, thank you, Dakota, for confirming the line number. there's two master branches involved. There's the Adafruit master and there's the Robert HH master. But I can tell up here from the URL that it's talking about the Robert one. And that is what the pull request is based on. So every pull request is really just, hey, I have this branch, which is get into the Git weeds. It can change, but it's kind of a consistent identifier for a particular set of work. Sorry, Git is a whole nother topic that I'm trying not to get into. But yeah, you can change it. So I'm just going to commit to that, and it'll show up on the pull request. So that's the important bit. So now it kicked us back to the pull request. So we're back in the Adafruit CircuitPython BME 680. And if we look closely here, the diff is almost the same, except there's one additional space here. Yeah, now we have a Git weeds. Yep. We'll notice that there's also, if we looked at commits, so commits are kind of records of differences. And when you do a pull request, you're saying like, hey, keep merge in these multiple commits potentially. Dakota says, yeah, and webpage says out of date, refresh. Yes. So if you have a tab open and you've left it open for a while, somebody fixes something that you asked them to, you'll get that out of date message. And this is the list of the commits that we'll merge in. And then the other thing I should point out is that while Robert's original commit has a red X, that's due to Travis, there's also now a yellow dot next to mine, which means that Travis has seen that I've created a new commit and is starting to work on testing it. So if we hit, I clicked the yellow dot, and now I'm going to hit details. And I should just, I'll go back in just a bit after we watch this go green. Now we can follow along. We see it's been running for 1:23 seconds. And we can see that, oh, it installed a lot of stuff. And it's a little funny, the way Travis works is that it allows you to, or it collapses stuff together. So that's what you saw there, was that it was showing me all the stuff it installed, and when it finished installing, it was like, oh, I need to collapse this, which it didn't do, because it's kind of weird. If I reload, it'll be collapsed, but it's not always good at keeping track. But let's take a look at the 3 checks that we ran. So first it does Pylint, and we can see here that the commands Pylint Adafruit BME 680 exited with 0, and your code's been rated 10 out of 10, which is awesome. Funny thing is, if you have a lot of bugs, and Summersoft and folks in the chat can attest to this, if you have too many issues, you can actually go negative. So it's kind of unfair to say it's out of 10, because you might be below 0. We can see that the Pylint worked, and then, oh, this is a second Pylint. It's running over all of the examples, minus a couple checks about doc strings and naming, because examples look a little bit different than module code. So we're out of 4 things, not 3 things. So we're 2 for 4. We'll take a look. This is the bundle build, and it passed just fine. We didn't expect that to change. It passed before, it should pass again. And same with the docs, it passed as well. So 4 for 4. We scroll back up, we're green. Pull request, nice green check mark. And if we hit back to go back to the pull request, under the commits tab, we can see this tiny little green check mark next to my commit. And then if we hit conversation, we can see that all 3 of these things are green as well. So this is just waiting for Carter to get stuff in the mail and validate that the math looks good, or the output of the math looks good. And then I just made Carter's job easier when he comes to reviewing this. So that is great. Okay, I've got 25 minutes till a hard stop. Are there any other questions that I should cover before I finish the stream? I know it's a little delayed, but yeah, any other questions? I could show Octobox a little bit. Let me just search to see if there's a BME 680 stuff in here that I can then. Nope. Maybe it's being. I would think it would have thought that it would be there. I might have archived it already. Could I? So Dakota asks, can you define what a commit is? Yeah, I can try. This is getting awfully close to the depths of what Git is, but I'll give it a shot. So you may have worked on a text file before, like a Word document or just something that you shared with other people. A slang version. And what you'll end up doing if you have multiple people working on the same thing is you'll email them back and forth, but I might work on it. And how do I, like, if I work on it and somebody else works on it at the same time, how do I manage us working on it both at the same time? And then there's also this problem of, like, I'm working on it over time, but, you know, I'm going to try something. I'm going to write a paragraph that I don't know whether I actually want it. So I'll actually take that original version, I'll copy it and rename it something else. People will do this all the time, where it's just like they'll have a folder, they'll have 5 different versions of a file that they just like copied into a new file from time to time so that they would be able to go back to it. I would say that, like, very, very basically, each one of those files is a commit because it's a specific state of that file at a given time. Now, when you have a source control system like CVS, Subversion, and Git is a more modern version, it's just formalizing that process of, like, keeping track of the history of not just one file, but a bunch of files all at once. And so a commit is a particular snapshot or a particular state in time of that repository. So if we look at, let's use the BME as an example. So if we go code, and then we can see here that it has 33 commits. So this is like, from the very start, we have basically 33 versions of this library in all time. And having that history is great because it gives you a history. It tells the story of how things change. So if we just scroll to the bottom here, it's a short list because 33 is really not that many. We can see that, oh, like Lady Ada is the first person who ever did this driver. And it was done on October 28th, 2017. She did a number of other commits in the same day. This thing here is what I was talking about, where more formal systems for tracking history of files actually give you, they kind of require you to give it that particular state a title and a description. This is only the title, so if we click in, if she put a description, we would see it up here, I think. And you can see that, like, for all but the first one, a git is usually, or a commit is usually displayed in terms of what changed from the previous time. So you may have heard of that as a kind of a patch. So, like, whereas in my model where I'm doing it all myself, I'm having full copies of everything all the time. The way that in the Git world we see it is just in terms of what changed from previously to now, previously to now, going forwards. And so we can see that, oh, like at some point I made some changes on the docs and Lady Ada merged my pull request. So this gets into some Git details that I won't talk about, but when I work in my repository and then it gets pulled in so a pull request is accepted and merged, it creates another commit. which is the commit where if something changed while I was writing my own version, it will actually like you might actually have changes in that merge commit to rectify concurrent changing. Yeah, so we can just see here, we can see Summersoft did a lot of stuff in February, which is great. And you can start to see that like some of these have check marks next to them as we added the checks and potentially fixed them and then broke them again or tried to fix them and then got it working again. So that's okay. Like it's not necessarily a bad thing that these commits had red X's because those red X's might have happened before it was actually merged in, depending on how strict the repository is. And then if you have any other questions, put them in. The last thing I want to say about commits is that they are identified by what are called hashes. And those hashes are just like, I took all the contents of what makes this unique, what makes this commit, like the author's name, the description, the title, the patches. So all of the differences between everything, or there's hashes everywhere, but basically everything that makes that state of the world unique. And I put it into some math that produces what we hope to be is a unique number. And out of that, we get what is called a commit hash, which is just meant to uniquely identify it. And I should say that also, like, should I say? Part of that data about a commit is like what the previous commit was. So it kind of creates a chain of like, hey, I'm a commit, and this is the commit I started with, all but the first one. And so you'll see that like when we build intermediate or like unreleased versions of CircuitPython, they're based on this number because that number is just like it's completely random, but it's a unique identifier for that state of the repository. So it's actually longer than the 7 digits here. If you want the full thing, you can hit copy or the clipboard. And if I just go over to my terminal and paste, you can see I got a much bigger number. But the first 7 digits of that bigger string are the same ones that you see here. So that's how commits are identified. Yeah, I skirted the weeds on the Git stuff, I think, but yeah, I think with that I'll wrap up. No more questions. If you have any feedback for me on the streams, if you want to see more stuff, please let me know. I've got it set up now. So if people want to just watch me work or have me, I guess I did a lot more narration than I thought I might, but if you want to see me talk over work, like I think I might actually do a stream for adding support for a new board. I've got a spare webcam because I just got a newer one. So I'll probably mount it just right here and down on my desk. So I might do that. Would love to get more people adding their boards to CircuitPython. So may do that too. In the meantime, links to know. You can always chat with me and a bunch of other really helpful people on the Adafruit Discord server, which is go to the URL adafru.it/discord. That will get you into our Discord. You can chat in all of the channels. We tend to hang out particularly in the CircuitPython text channel. And we have a CircuitPython weekly meeting that happens at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. In our Discord channel. It's in the voice channel, which I'm actually in and nobody hopped in. And then those are recorded, I should say that. So if this is the first time you've heard of that, it's open to everybody, so everybody's welcome to join, but you can also listen to it after the fact. So go to the Adafruit YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Adafruit, and you'll see a playlist under playlists that is all of the CircuitPython weeklies for over a year previously, and you can hear what we're working on, what's coming down the pike, and all of that. So yeah, if you have any questions about doing pull request reviews, please just join our Discord and we're happy to help. Yeah, Sedacious snuck in one final question. Says, sorry if I missed it, but what is the best way to get access to the changes from a pull request to test them? That can be a complicated question. I talked about it a little bit for this stuff in just the sense of like, they're only changing one file for a lot of the libraries. I'll just show it again. So if I go to pull requests, this is what I showed earlier, Sedacious. And it's just a file. Like all this library stuff is just a file. I just will hit view file. And that gives me just that version of the file, and then hit raw, and then I'll just save it. I won't do any fancy Git stuff. That comes when you need, like, if it's one of my CircuitPython pull requests and it's like 50 change files, like that's a whole different thing. But for most of these library pull requests, it's a file or two that change. So I would just recommend downloading them individually. Sedacious, I know you do actually do CircuitPython stuff. So very, very briefly, I would just add on the pull request, you can see what repository and what branch it's coming from. Like here, it's from Robert H. Master. I would actually just add that person as a remote in your local copy. You don't need to clone their fork, because if you all Git repositories of a what? Most of them are all related, and they're actually not related in any particular hierarchy. This idea that like if I fork this, which I think I have a fork of, we can see there's 5 forks. This idea that this is the original repository and these 5 forks are like subservient to that is actually a GitHub thing. It's not a Git thing. The most important bit is like that first the first commit defines a repository, because all of the commits after it are relative to that. And so a fork is just I'm going to just copy all of that. Like I'm just going to download that data, and then I'm going to create a commit that references something into that chain. And that's really just like a separate version of a repository. So like, this is definitely the weeds, but that's okay. We're almost done. We always put the weeds at the end. There's actually 2, like when you fork, you're creating, usually you have 2 copies of a repository for yourself. You have the fork that you made, which is your GitHub public version of a repository. And then you clone that down to your own computer. And that's a third copy. So, and they're all kind of equivalent. This is definitely the weeds. They're all kind of equivalent, and you can actually like push things other places, push commits, and push is the idea of like, oh, I made some changes locally and I want to like make them available in this other repository as well. But yeah, so you don't the moral of the story is if you have a fork of the original repository and then you already have that local, you just add them as a remote. And then, so basically that's saying like, I'm going to get updates from not only the original repository, but I'm going to get some updates from somebody else as well. So for example, like my CircuitPython repo that is local to me, I actually have MicroPython as a remote as well. Along with Adafruit CircuitPython. So that's why when I teach people Git, I usually will have them name their remotes the username on GitHub so that it matches up. But yeah, that was kind of the weeds. But yeah, if it's more than a few files, that's what I would do. There is a fancy way that Jerry has pointed me to where you can use this branch name with the original remote, or no. This is telling us the master branch of this copy of the repository. So, yeah. You wish I had a weed whacker. I'm just getting in the weeds all the time. I have a weed whacker downstairs, but that doesn't help me when I'm doing a live stream. Okay, with that, I'm gonna stop it before I'm like past the weeds into whatever is past the weeds. Yeah, thank you all, and I already said all the stuff about where you can look it up. I'll do this again. Subscribe to me on Twitch. I've got like, I don't know, 3 followers or something, so I don't mind doing this like lackadaisical, like let me just talk about this pull request for an hour. But yeah, thank you. Into the ditch. Yeah, definitely. I'm in the ditch.